Hi guys, this is Mrs. Latham here. Today we're going to be looking at section 3.6, which is solving compound inequalities. You will need a notebook and a pencil for this lesson to take notes on. And then today's learning objectives are that students will be able to solve compound inequalities without a calculator, and students will be able to graph inequalities using a number line. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to look at is what is a compound inequality? Well, in this case, a compound inequality consists of two distinct inequalities joined by the word and or the word or. The first one we're going to look at is what an and is. Most of the time, you'll see it written without the word and, but if we notice, we do have two inequality symbols. When we're dealing with an and inequality, we want to look at the overlap of the graphs. So what does that mean? If I was to break apart my 3 is less than x less than or equal to 7, I would get these two inequalities. We would get 3 is less than x, and we would get x is less than or equal to 7. So when we have an and inequality, compound inequality, we're going to look at the graphs of both of these, but only their overlap. So if I was to graph each one individually, x is greater than 3, I would have an open circle on 3, and my arrow would be pointing to the right. Then for my x is less than or equal to 7, I would have a closed circle on 7, and then my arrow is going to point to the left. So if you notice, we have this section of overlap where they share the same solution, what they have in common. And this is the part I'm highlighting in yellow. That would be that is what we would then graph for this inequality. That is the solutions that work for both inequalities. So if I plugged in 5 in for x, we would have 3 is less than 5, which is less than or equal to 7. That is true because it's in between those two numbers. So when we go to graph this, it should look like this. There should be no arrows. It kind of looks like a dumbbell. And you will have an open circle on 3 again and a closed circle on 7, and then just a line connecting the two of them. Okay. The second one is an or inequality. Now this one, we always include the word or in. So if you're unsure of if it's an and or an or, check to see if the word or is in it. If it is, it's an or. If it isn't, it's an and. For this one, this is actually easier. It's already split in half, right? We have x is less than or equal to -2, and then we have x is greater than 4. In this case, there is no overlap, so we have to graph each inequality. That's why this one's called an each. You need both of them. So if I was to graph both of these, it's actually going to look like this. So I have a closed circle on my -2 and an arrow pointing to the left, and an open circle on 4 and an arrow pointing to the right. So we're just simply graphing both of those solutions. Keep in mind with an or, sometimes the arrows can point in the same direction, and sometimes they can point even like in towards each other and keep going on forever. Those are a couple other types of solutions, not as common though. The two diagrams we have for and or, those are going to be the most common. So let's get into solving some compound inequalities and seeing how they solve and graph out. Now, if we're looking at the first one, I have -62 is less than or equal to -7n plus 8, which is less than 64. So in this case, because there's no or, and we have two inequalities and something sandwiched in the middle, this tells me this is an and. Okay, so when I go to solve these, I actually have to write out my two inequalities. So my first inequality from this and statement is going to be -62 is less than or equal to -7n plus 8. So it's kind of the first half here. Then my second inequality is going to be my -7n plus 8 less than 64. It's really important that when we go to copy these down and solve for each inequality, that we copy them down the way they are written and we do not change where any of the numbers are. If you end up flipping anything, you might not get the same answer as you're supposed to. So the first one is negative 62 is less than or equal to negative 7n plus 8. And then I'm going to separate that with a line down the middle just because I want you guys to see that the work is separate. And then I'm going to have my negative 7n plus 8 is less than 64. So again, I wrote these in the same way that they're written in the inequality. To solve for the one on the left, the pink one, I'm going to draw my line down the inequality, and then I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides. Keep in mind when we're subtracting a number from a negative number, we're going to add them. So we're going to get negative 70 is less than or equal to negative 7n. The next step here is we're going to divide both sides by negative 7. And remember, with inequalities, if we are dividing by a negative number on both sides, we have to flip the inequality. So this turns into a greater than or equal to symbol, and we get the answer 10. Okay, I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Then the next thing we're going to look at is the yellow inequality. So notice it's going to be the same exact steps. The steps do not change. I'm going to subtract, well, first I'm going to draw my line. Now I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides. I'm left with negative 7n is less than, and then 64 minus 8 should give us 56. Then we're going to divide both sides by negative 7. And again, our inequality symbol is going to flip here, and we get the answer negative 8. So now we can actually come back and take our two answers and combine them just like they were combined in the beginning. So I'm going to erase my line for now. That way I can combine these. So I have my 10 is greater than or equal to my n, and then greater than negative 8. If you notice here, we actually have the negative number on the right side, and I like it to match our number line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip everything. So I'm going to rewrite it as negative 8, but because now it's coming first, I have to change the way my sign is facing. So I'm going to have is less than n, which is less than or equal to 10. So when I go to graph these, I'm going to put my numbers on my number line. I do not have enough spaces for negative 8 and 10, so I'm just going to estimate a little bit, and then I'm going to graph these all together. So I'm going to stick negative 8 here. Roughly 0 will be here, and then 10 is going to be down a little bit further. I'm going to have an open circle on my 8. I am going to have a closed circle on my 10. And because I'm looking at every single number in between the two of them, they are going to be connected, and I'll do this in blue, by a solid blue line. And there we go. That's our graph, and that is the answer to our inequality. Now, when I go to solve my OR, I don't have to separate anything. They're already separated. So we're just going to have to solve for each one individually. So the first one I'm going to do is the one on the left. Keep in mind the steps I use to solve the one on the left might differ from the one on the right. I'm going to start by adding 2 on both sides. Please excuse my dogs, they're playing. 2's will cancel. I'm left with negative 5b is less than or equal to negative 40. And then I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. Again, dividing by a negative, my inequality symbol is going to flip, and then negative 40 divided by negative 5 should give us a positive 8. Then I can go ahead and solve for the one on the right. I am going to add 5 to both sides, and I get 5b is less than negative 30. I'm going to divide both sides by 5. My 5's cancel out, and b is less than negative 6. And then when I go to write this as a final answer, I have to make sure I add in my OR. So my final answer will be that b is greater than or equal to 8, or b is less than negative 6. That's very important that we include that or in there, okay? I'm first going to graph my b is greater than or equal to 8. So I'll add my 8 here. I'm going to have a closed circle, and all the values that are greater than 8 are going to be going towards the right. And I draw my arrow. Then I'm going to do my b is less than negative 6. So roughly negative 6 is here on our number line. I'm going to have an open circle for this one. And then all the numbers less than 6 are going to be to the left. So we're going to have our arrow pointing to the left. And there we go. There's our graph for that one. And if you wanted to, you could also go ahead and add in a 0 if you wanted to kind of give an idea of where they're on the number line. Okay? Here we go. There's our 2 answers for that one. Let's do 2 more. These ones are inequalities with variables on both sides. So when we're solving the and, we have to be really, really careful with this one, okay? So I'm going to start by solving my first half of my and inequality, which is this piece here. Notice I'm stopping before I hit that second inequality. So I have my 2x plus 9 is greater than or equal to 1 plus x. Again, I'm going to draw my line down the middle, and I'm just going to solve for this half first. In this case, I am going to, let's see, I'll subtract x first. Let's do that. Subtract x on both sides. It's going to cancel out on the right, and we are left with x plus 9 is greater than or equal to 1. Next thing I can do is subtract 9 on both sides, and I get left with x is greater than or equal to negative 8. Okay? Now I'm going to do my second half. And again, keep in mind, I am now going after that first inequality symbol and everything to the right of it. So now I have 1 plus x is greater than 10x minus 8. Draw my line down the middle. I'm going to subtract x again on this side. X's cancel. I'm left with 1 is greater than 9x minus 8. Add 8 to both sides, so that step did differ. And I'm left with 9 is greater than 9x. Lastly, we're going to divide by 9, and x is greater than 1. So in this case, I do have to add these back in. I do know for a fact that 1 is greater than negative 8. So I have to make sure when I go to write this, I want my numbers to make sense. So I have negative 8, I have 1, and an x. X is greater than negative 8, so that's going to be my inequality symbol there. And then x is less than 1, so that'll be my inequality symbol there. And that would be our final answer written as an and. And then again, I can go and graph these. So if I stuck 1 here, this would be 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So in this case, I can actually fit all my numbers on the number line. Barely, but I can. So I am going to add all my numbers, and now I'm going to graph. So my negative 8 and my x, it's equal to, so I'm going to have a closed circle here. Then I'm going to have an open circle on my 1, and we are going to be connected with a line in between. And that is our graph. For the or, this one, again, we're just solving each piece individually and then writing them as an or. So I'm going to draw my line down my middle for my first one. In this case, it looks like I forgot to put an x somewhere on the right side. If you notice, I have negative 8 minus 9. So for this, we're just going to put an x right next to the 8. Whether or not it was meant to be there, I don't know. But for now, that's where we're going to put it. And let's see what answer we get. So I am going to start off by adding 8x on both sides. I get 10x plus 3 is greater than my negative 9. I'm then going to subtract 3 on both sides. The 3's cancel, and we get 10x is greater than, let me see, that's negative 12. Then we're going to divide everything by 10. And if you notice, we do get a fraction, totally fine. If we're looking here, 12 and 10 are both divisible by 2, so I can rewrite this as negative 6/5, which is going to be slightly in between negative 1 and negative 2 to give you an idea, okay, which is totally fine. We can graph a fraction. Then for the one on the right, same process, draw my line, and now I'm going to solve. I'm going to start with subtracting 5x first. 5x's cancel. I'm left with 1x plus 10 is less than or equal to 8. Subtract 10 on both sides. 10's cancel, and x is less than or equal to negative 2. So I could go back and rewrite this as x is greater than negative 6/5, or x is less than or equal to negative 2. So in this case, as I was saying, right, negative 6/5, that's roughly in between negative 1 and negative 2. So I have to make sure negative 1 is on my graph and negative 2, okay? So I'm going to put those roughly in the middle. I'm actually going to skip some space, that way we can not have them right on top of each other. And so those are my numbers. I'm going to start off with graphing my x is less than or equal to negative 2. I have a closed circle, and my arrow is going to be pointing to the left. Then for my fraction, I'm just going to estimate it. Keep in mind, it is not, it is smaller than negative 1.5, so it's going to be roughly right about in here. Okay, we're just going to estimate. It's not going to be perfect, which is fine. And then again, so x is greater than, so we're going to have our arrow pointing to the right. There we go. We just graphed those two as well. Okay, that's just a blank page. That's it that we have for today. If you have any questions, please reach out to your math teacher, and thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye.